Tired of dealing with vein disease? Have your symptoms gotten worse?
Oh, these spider veins are ugly.
My legs and ankles are always swollen.
My legs are tired of standing all day.
While some symptoms can be managed by lifestyle changes, other factors are out of your control. Get help from the experts at Vein Clinics of Hawaii. To learn more about your treatment options, call 427-5565 or visit veinclinicsofhawaii.com. Aloha, Hawaii! It's time for the Vein Clinics of Hawaii radio show. Their team's approach to diagnosing problems and developing solutions and treatment plans are beyond compare. So let's get started with your host of the show, Mike Buck, and Medical Director, Dr. Randall Juliff of the Vein Clinics of Hawaii.
.com. Yeah, there you go. And welcome to the program. If you've not been with us before, it's a show now that we've been doing for a couple of years, Dr. Juliff and I, and talking about all kinds of things, but mostly venous insufficiency or problem of vein issues. But, today, and this is really cool, there's a lot of things going on in your legs and in your whole body for that matter, and it's all called circulation. And there's some fascinating things we're going to learn. I was going through some of the stuff, Doc, that you gave me, and I thought, my goodness, this is such interesting trivia. I would imagine that if you learned what we're going to discuss today, you could probably win Jeopardy.
Yeah.
Which is by the way, one of our favorite programs. We try to watch Jeopardy every day.
Yeah.
But it is interesting for those that don't know. Dr. Juliff is the medical director of Vein Clinics of Hawaii on 4 islands, on the Big Island, Maui, Kauai, and here on Oahu. And as a medical director, deals with just so much really interesting stuff that we do this program so that we sort of educate. And today, I'm really pleased to tell you that, and I've already learned just from looking at my notes, no wonder you decided several years ago as a cardio doctor, a heart surgeon, to get into this circulation business because it's fascinating.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to talk about, the circulatory system just in general. Today, we talk a lot about veins, all the time, and veins is just one half of the circulatory system. And then there's also, I think a misconception by many people about, well, really, what is an artery and what is a vein? And I think sometimes people use those terms interchangeably, especially vein.
Hey, I get it all the time. I just tell people when they ask me, I say, listen to our show Saturday and Sunday because there's a lot of things going on in there, and once you understand what the difference is, you can sort of appreciate it. And the more I've done that since we've been doing the show, the more I learned about just a minute. There's not just arteries and veins. There's all kinds of other things going on in there, too.
Exactly.
We are a complicated business here.
It's a very complicated machine.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. But, so I started thinking about this concept of circulation, and I can remember when I was a resident in my training, you'd question, younger residents and put them on the spot, try to, find out what they know. And, one of the questions that I always asked them was, okay, if you were a blood cell, a red blood cell, for instance, and you were, let's say in the left ventricle of the heart, which is one of the main chambers, what is going to be your path all the way around the body that is going to then finally get you back into the left ventricle? Because it's our circulatory system is a circuit.
It's fascinating.
And so they try to answer that question. I made it a little more complicated because I asked them to indicate each artery and all that sort of thing. But basically, if you were a red blood cell, you start out on the left side of the heart, and there's two different circulations. There's two different circulatory systems. Really, there's the what we call the pulmonary circulation. That's the blood flow going to the lungs. And then there's what we call the systemic circulation. That's the blood flow that goes to the body. But, so the left ventricle, being on the left side of the heart, is the main ventricle that's pumping blood into the main artery in our body, which is called the aorta. So a blood cell is going to be pumped from the left ventricle out into the aorta and carrying what we call oxygenated blood. That blood has oxygen in it. It's we typically draw that in books in red to indicate that oxygen is in there. And actually, the blood is red. When we're looking at when we're doing surgery on blood vessels, the blood that we see coming out of arteries is actually bright red. The blood that we see coming out of veins is bluish, and that has to
same blood, by the way, but it looks a little different, doesn't it?
Yeah. It has to do with the fact that oxygen is either in there or not. But anyway, so the blood cell goes through the aorta, main blood vessel, goes down the length of our body, and if it's going down to our foot, then it's going to go through all of the arterial systems, all the way down to let's say the big toe. And then at the end of the line there, at the end of the path, you go from arteries down to what we call arterioles, which are very, very small arteries, and then out into the capillary system.
Oh boy.
And
that's about halfway through the trip.
Yeah,
right?
that's halfway. That's halfway through the systemic circulation. So, the capillaries are those tiny, tiny little, blood vessels that, that move then blood from the arterial side to the venous side. So,
Okay.
and in those capillary systems, that's where blood is releasing its oxygen to tissues, So oxygen gets released, CO2 gets picked up, and then it starts on its way back to the heart, and it's going to go through a series of veins, and eventually it comes back to the right side of the heart. Started out in the left, comes back to the right. And then it starts on its way through the pulmonary circulation, the circulation to the lungs. So it goes from the right side of the heart, gets pumped by that pumping system within the heart, out into the lungs, and it goes through a very intricate set of blood vessels through the lungs, picks up oxygen, and then comes back to the left side of the heart.
Busy little blood cell. Yeah, very busy. Yeah.
Busy blood cells and busy everything, really. So that is a very, very short description of the circulatory system. Now, we didn't always know that. We didn't always understand where blood, how blood was pumped, and where it went from here to there, and et cetera. We're going to talk about that a little later. The history of how all of this unfolded, but which in and of itself is very, very interesting. But so that's kind of a short description of the circulation. So again, there's two circuits. One that goes to one of blood going in and out of the lungs and back to the heart, and then one going to the body in general, and then back to the heart. So they're in parallel. In that, each system is parallel because it's going to all sorts of different areas. I mean, blood that goes into the aorta is not only going down to the big toe, but it's also going up to your earlobe and out to your shoulder, and is everywhere. So, but that's all the arterial side. However, it is in series because of the fact that, again, it goes to the systemic circulation, back to the heart, and then out into the lung. And the reason that they're in series, even though blood is, going out and coming back to the heart, they're in series because the heart, although it's one organ, is really two pumps. The left ventricle and the right ventricle both serve as a pump, but they're pumping to, different parts.
Different parts,
of the body.
that's fascinating.
And bringing about the physiology that needs to happen. So right side pumps to the heart, left side pumps to the body. So we get very used to saying that arteries carry oxygenated blood. I mean, that's just kind of, what we say. What's an artery? Well, an artery is blood that is, or a blood vessel that's carrying oxygen.
Fresh, ready to use.
Yeah. So, and then veins carry deoxygenated blood because in general, that's what it is. But do all arteries, follow that rule? Well, no, they don't.
Sure.
In this,
And here I thought I was going to learn something.
this is the other another teaching point that I often asked medical students and young residents. Can you think of any artery in the body that doesn't carry oxygenated blood? And they'd be thinking about it, and they say, "Oh no, I can't really." But the main artery that comes out of the heart that goes to the lungs, it's called the pulmonary artery.
Okay.
But that's the artery that's taking deoxygenated blood to the lungs.
Right.
So
drop it off to get fixed.
Get filled back up. And likewise, then the blood gets oxygenated and then comes back to the heart through a pulmonary vein, and that vein carries oxygenated blood. So those are the two answers there: pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein. So it's a little more proper or a little more comprehensive to say that arteries are those blood vessels that are carrying blood away from the heart. And veins are those blood vessels that are carrying blood back to the heart. So that's just a little, fun fact.
That makes
medical fun fact.
That's the cut and dried part, and so I would imagine that a lot of those students, it takes them a while to learn those things.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, because it's again, it's kind of a complicated system. But anyway, so the biggest artery we've mentioned already, that's the aorta.
The aorta,
and that's the big blood vessel that comes right out of the left ventricle, and all branches to the body come off of that aorta. What is the biggest vein?
Yeah, and he's asking me this to put me on the spot, and I'm guessing because I know about two that have names, and one's the big saphenous, and one's the little saphenous.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing if I'm going to get put on the spot, the biggest vein is the big saphenous vein.
The great saphenous.
I'm probably wrong.
Yeah, unfortunately, no.
Yeah, of course. He set me up. That's okay. I'm a punching bag. I'm learning.
I just want to see how closely you're paying attention, Mike. But the biggest vein actually is something called the vena cava. You've
vena
probably
cava, right.
heard of that, vena cava. Vena cava, tomato. But that's the vein that a huge vein that runs down the middle, up and down the middle of the body, very close to the aorta actually, anatomically. And but the vena cava, we've got an inferior and we've got a superior vena cava. The inferior vena cava is collecting blood from the entire lower part of the body, so from our chest going downward. So it's a pretty big vein. So how big is the aorta in the middle of the body? It's probably a couple inches in diameter.
It's pretty big. It's pretty big.
which is a very big artery.
Especially when you take a look at some of the arteries in the say near the bottom of your feet where they're getting pretty small.
Yeah, exactly. And the vena cava is probably, the normal vena cava is probably twice that big. So the vena cava is, much bigger. I mean, when you're looking at it anatomically, it's a good sized vein, and you don't want to disrupt it in any way, shape, or form. But okay, so some fun facts about human circulation. The amount of blood in the body. How much blood do we have in our body? Well, as it turns out, it's about 4.5 to 5.5 liters.
Okay. So now so when you take a look at it, when they say somebody's bled out, they get in a traumatic accident and there's a pool of blood.
Right.
It's a limited pool.
It is.
When you say that, when you say liters, we don't deal, as much with liters as they do in Europe and everything. But there's about 3 point something liters to a gallon.
Right.
And so that means how much blood do you have?
A liter is a little more than a quart.
Okay.
So if we've got 4.5 to 5 liters, then we've got 5 or 6 quarts, I guess.
Yeah.
Which
is about a gallon and a quarter.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not, that I guess when you think about it, it's probably
not
a little less. It's a little less than probably most people would think.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Well, you use the term bled out, which is a nice
I know
term.
it's kind of gross,
but
you see that on the cop shows. He's bled out.
Yeah, what does that mean? Does that mean that that person has lost all of their blood volume? Well, no. That basically what has happened is that you lose
a great deal of it.
Yeah, you have a good amount of it, such that once you lose a certain amount of your blood volume, it's not going to support your circulatory system. Yeah. So when as you lose more and more blood, your heart is even though it's pumping harder to try to keep up with it, at some point you hit a threshold where it's not consistent with life, and that's the point at which you're
not. Yeah.
So then there's this thing called cardiac output. And that has to do with the amount of blood that the heart is pumping. And so the cardiac output is typically given in liters per minute. So and the average cardiac output is about 4.5. So that means that, for the average size male, typically we talk about a 70 kilogram male. If their blood volume is, total blood volume is 4.5 liters, and their cardiac output is about 4.5 liters. What it turns out is that you're pumping your entire blood volume, through your body once every minute.
Yeah.
So, even though...
So you thought we're going to give you this, takes 3 days from that cell to get from my heart back to the heart again. It's like there.
Yeah.
It's out of the station and right back in the station.
It's moving fast.
Yeah.
It's moving fast. Yeah. So, which is interesting. I mean, the heart pumps a whole heck of a lot of blood. Now, during exercise, that's at rest. Your heart's pumping about 4.5 liters of blood in a minute at rest. During exercise, especially very strenuous exercise, that can increase 3 to 4 times. So that could be 15 to 18 or so liters of blood per minute. Which is incredible, for our body to be able to accommodate that. And why is that happening? Well, that's happening because your body is requiring more oxygen. I mean, that's the primary reason why your body is sensing that, it needs to get more blood out there, more red blood cells out there to release their oxygen. So now, how do we increase our cardiac output? If we're at rest, we're at about 5, and if we do heavy exercise, we have to shoot up to 15. Well, how do we do that?
How do we do that? Yeah.
And we do that by increasing the heart rate, of course. Obviously everybody knows that when they exercise, their heart rate goes way up. We also have something that is referred to as stroke volume. And stroke volume is the amount of blood that the heart is pumping in one beat.
One beat. Yeah.
And that's about 70 milliliters or so. But the main way that we increase our total cardiac output if we're exercising strenuously is the heart rate. I mean, that's the main way that we increase it.
And this is, by the way, what we really keep an eye on, right? I mean, all of these numbers that you're going to give us, it explains what high blood pressure is, low blood pressure, problem, not enough blood, too much. I mean, it can be too much. I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah. So the average heart rate is roughly about 70. Now the average heart rate for, if you look at people individually, I mean it's all over the board from 60 to or some of these, really, especially long distance runners. I mean, they can have resting heart rates in the high 40s, low 50s. But typically people are, mid 60s to, mid 90s. But the average heart rate is about 70 per minute. During exercise, that can go up tremendously. It can go up to in the range of 180, 190, 200 if you're exercising. And one of the things that we look at, if we look at what do we want to achieve when we're doing if we want to do exercise that is keeping our cardiovascular health. Is that we look at our heart rate when we're exercising, And one of the goals that we want is to elevate our heart rate and keep it there for some period of time. So there is an ideal heart rate for exercise. If you subtract your age from 220, roughly that's going to give you your ideal exercise heart rate. So if you're and what we mean by that is so for instance, if you're 45 years old, you would subtract that from
220.
Yeah, from 220, you get 175. So if you really want to optimize your cardiovascular exercise health,
that's where it ought to get up to.
Yeah, you want to get your heart rate up to about 175. Again, if you're 45. That's
okay. Now, by the way, when you're asleep, or that's you can almost count the boom.
Yeah. When at rest, you want it, low.
Right.
But if you get your heart rate up to this ideal heart rate for exercise, and you keep it there for about 30 minutes, and you do that, 3 or 4 times a week, that's kind of the definition of good,
good cardio,
cardiovascular kind of exercise and optimal health kind of thing. So. Getting back to the stroke volume, again, that's the amount of blood that's pumped from the left ventricle with each contraction. Again, that's about 70 milliliters. So how much would that be? Probably. Yeah,
I'm trying to do the math, but I was looking at some other ones. It's amazing, is what it is. I'm kind of at a loss for words.
Yeah, 8 or 10 ounces, I think.
Yeah.
But so during exercise, what happens to stroke volume? Well, stroke volume is going to increase. Now, how does that increase? Well, it increases because of the heart is going to be contracting, more strongly. And also, hopefully the heart's going to be the ventricle itself is going to be filling with more blood in an attempt to push more blood out. So that will happen also to increase your cardiac output during exercise. However, at some point you kind of get there's a decreasing return, because if your heart rate gets too high, then the ventricle doesn't have time to fill.
Yeah, I was going to say, more oxygen here, please.
Yeah. And so at some point, the stroke volume actually, diminishes a little bit as the heart rate goes too high. But so our cardiac output when we exercise, the main thing is the heart rate.
Are you sometimes amazed at how bad some people can get? Mm-hmm. I mean, what we're talking about here is the average guy, 45-year-old male, is some of these numbers that you're using, right? But I mean, there are some people that his heart rate go way, way, way up, way, way too high.
Yeah.
And some people that are like comatose because they're just not high enough.
Well, ideally you want your heart rate, fairly low, during rest. Yeah. And then the capability of increasing your heart rate when you need to. And especially if you're trying to, do aerobic conditioning, then to get that heart rate up and leave it and keep it there for 30 minutes. If you're on a treadmill or, an elliptical machine or running outside or whatever.
Doc, I was watching this group of people in a spinning thing.
Oh yeah.
And I'm thinking, how in the I got tired watching these people. I couldn't believe. And that must mean they're in cardio. They're in pretty good shape to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing when you look at some of those high level athletes. I mean, look at the Ironman.
Oh yeah,
I mean the
duration,
and the length of time that they're taxing their cardiovascular system. I mean, it's just amazing. I can't believe it. Yep. So. Anyway, so what is the heart capable of? I mean, it's a tremendous organ, and if you count the number of beats in a day, it's a little over 100,000. If you're, I was assuming a heart rate of 70,
Wow.
And so a little over 100,000 times per day, your heart's going to beat. we don't ask any other muscle in our body to do that.
I should say, yeah.
And the heart basically the heart's a muscle. But I mean, it's so much more than that. But and again, it's untiring, and it works, day after day for our entire life. But in a day, over 100,000 beats. In a week, 705,000 beats.
Oh, brother!
In a month, a little over 3 million. In a year, 36.2 million. Beats.
Boy.
That's a lot.
And this is getting the numbers are getting pretty big here. It's like the national debt.
Yeah, yeah, these are national debt type
keeps
numbers.
climbing,
Yeah. And then in a lifetime, if you live to be 80, it's going to be 2.9 billion. So
that's totally
it's
amazing.
just incredible. Yeah, it's
but
incredible.
what you said, if you go back to what we were saying earlier, folks, and that is how much blood you have in the first place. Well, it's a lot less than you think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that means that it is going, when you asked the question at the very beginning, this is one cell, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How long does it seems to me that by the time we said this, it's already made the route.
Oh, yeah.
It is really on the fly.
But by the time I got through that initial description, it's gone through your body, 3 or 4 times probably.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, so gallons. So, 2,000 gallons of blood each day is pumped by your heart.
Wow.
That adds up to about 730,000 gallons of blood in a year. Or for our 80-year-old guy, 58.4 million gallons. It's some of these numbers are incredible. And that's, the heart is such an amazing organ because we have a nervous system that goes throughout our body, and the heart does respond to that. There's no question about that. However, there's an intrinsic, kind of nerve conduction or nervous system within the heart that just keeps going, keeps firing. It kind of works in some ways independently. It's definitely affected by our nervous system otherwise, but we've got this intrinsic electrical activity. We've got this automatic what we call contractility of the heart muscle. We don't have to think about it; it just happens.
You couldn't think that fast. You really couldn't.
No, you couldn't. Yeah. It just goes on, for a lifetime, basically. The heart is really an amazing organ. Okay, so blood vessels. We have over 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body as an adult.
No wonder you get so much trouble. There's so much stuff going on in there. Yeah,
a lot of possibility for problems. But that includes arteries, veins, and capillaries. And 60,000 miles is enough to wrap around the earth 2.5 times.
Yikes. And and if you're a little person, it's actually probably the size of the person almost doesn't matter. I mean, it's still got to be there in similar volume.
It does a little bit, but you're right. I mean, even kids, have a tremendous length of blood vessels in their body. We talked a little bit about capillaries before. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels. All of them are typically less than the diameter of a hair, and smaller. The average size is several microns. So they're very, very small. It's not like we can see them. And, the capillary system, being a route, being a connection between arteries and veins is something that we didn't know for a long time. We're going to talk about the history of this whole science here in a minute. But capillaries we didn't understand because we didn't really understand capillaries until we were able to look at them with a microscope.
Yeah. By the way, that's two systems, and in between the two is this small group of things called capillaries.
Yeah.
And how they do their job just blows me away.
Right. Yes. So, and again, very, very tiny. Some of them are so small that a red blood cell, there's single red blood cells going through these capillaries at a time in single file. And that's how, the red blood cell has to be that close to, the wall of the capillary in order to allow for the oxygen to be extracted.
One cell at a time.
One cell at a time.
And can you imagine the speed at which that's going? You think you have a fast hot rod car on the racetrack? That is going very fast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and then the other interesting thing about our circulation is, we talk about the fact that there are arteries and there are veins, and I think the general concept is, well, whatever is going through the arteries must be going through the veins, and roughly that's true. But our venous system holds a fair amount more blood at any one time than our arterial system.
Okay.
So
I wonder why.
There's roughly about 75% of our blood volume that's in our venous system at any one time. We call that capacitance. What is the capacity of the venous system as opposed to the arterial? Now, part of that is the physiology behind it is that veins in general are very thin-walled. Arteries, when you look at them and when you feel them, the wall is much thicker. And the main reason for that is that they've got arteries have a much thicker muscular layer. There is what we call smooth muscle over that make up the wall of all those blood vessels, both artery and veins. But arteries have a much greater amount of muscular tissue that make up the wall, and that is in part because it needs to be reactive. Our arteries, as well as our veins, but our arteries are getting smaller and bigger all the time, depending on exercise, temperature, etc. But the veins do the same sort of thing, but their capacitance is much greater because the walls are flimsier. The veins, since they aren't as firm, they can easily expand.
Okay.
So, and there are obviously things, within our body, the nervous system, and what's going on from a hemodynamic standpoint that's going to determine how much blood is going to be in the venous system. But it can sort of fill up as you.
I was going to say, does it fill up a little bit?
It does, yeah. and this is why some people. When people are standing in one place for a long period of time and they get dizzy or they pass out, often you see at events or whatever, people are standing in one place, and if they can't walk around, what's happening is that their blood volume is actually slowly accumulating within the venous system of the lower body.
Right. And if there's something wrong with that system, can't come up.
Yeah,
can't come back up.
That also, but even if the venous system is working normally, and people again are standing in one place, which means their muscles aren't working. Which we've talked about that before. Muscular activity helps movement of blood within the veins in an upward direction, and if that's not happening, then the blood settles into the venous system. The blood pressure drops. That's how much blood can kind of settle into the lower part of your body, and people pass out or get very dizzy.
I was going to say, and here's my wah moment for the minute. When you take a look at a whole bunch of military guards in great shape, I mean, these guys are in great shape. They're buff. They're all beefy, and one faints.
Yeah,
I mean, because.
And that's what's going on.
That's what's going on.
That's what's going on. And you're right. It doesn't matter about physical conditioning, and in some instances it doesn't even. I mean, they can have perfectly normally functioning venous systems.
But I got to ask you a question, and I know we have a lot of other stuff. We always run out of time on the show. We never get it all done. But I got to ask you this, and that I think it's pretty cool. Is that when people faint like that? I think it's quite amazing that they don't do more damage when they're fainting than they do. Yeah. I do know that as we get older, falling down is a big issue. I mean, you can just fall down, get dizzy and fall down, and you can have permanent damage somehow. But isn't it amazing how people that are in pretty good shape, if they faint, they can kind of get up,
Yeah.
I mean, they don't. Why is that? Maybe because you fall down, boom, you think, gee, something had to have broke.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just relaxed.
It depends. It definitely depends on the age of the patient.
Yeah,
like you alluded to. I mean, if you're old, then something's going to break or whatever. But if you're young and your bones are resilient and whatever, you're gonna tolerate that. But it's a good thing that you do faint because that's what you need to do.
Isn't that amazing?
And that's you need to get your body flat
Down.
on the ground. and with respect to blood collecting in the venous system, that's why when people faint, the first thing that everybody says is that you elevate their legs.
Yeah.
And the reason that you're elevating your legs is to get all that blood going back
down there where it belongs.
into the body and back to the heart, so that the heart can keep beating normally. So,
Amazing.
But you're right. Those are military things, graduations, various types of events where people are weddings, that kind of thing. So, especially if people are dehydrated, that's when that happens.
But I think it's kind of interesting, and I do know that probably everything that you do. And by the way, Dr. Juleff, Vein Clinics of Hawaii, Doc is the medical director and the chief surgeon. And by the way, as a cardio surgeon before, that must be the thing that you really have to kind of understand this whole circulation thing, because everything else is depending on what that heart is doing and where all of that stuff is going.
Sure. Yeah. The heart plays a huge role. There's no question about that. But our concept of the heart actually has changed, tremendously over history, and
probably helped by technology and just your instrumentation, everything you can use.
Well,
testing.
Definitely with that. But luckily we started to understand the circulation, the anatomy and the physiology of circulation a fair bit before we had all the newfangled kind of things that we have today, like X-ray, ultrasound, angiography, all that sort of thing. But we really didn't understand the circulatory system until a guy named William Harvey described it, fairly accurately, and that was back in 1628. Now,
Jeez.
Well, when you think about that, it's like that was a long time ago, and he was the first one to describe it in a fairly accurate kind of way. Now, before that, it's surprising, how far off base we were, and there were actually some very, very smart people who it took a while to figure it all out, but I mean it's understandable because we just don't have or they didn't have the technology or the understanding that we do today. But this guy William Harvey was a guy from England, and again he kind of got a real close description of really what was going on around 1628. But prior to that, there were writings about medicine and the circulatory system dating back 3,000 years BC. There are writings that we've talked about before on this show. There's a number of different papyruses, and these were
sounds Egyptian.
Ancient Greek writings, and there's a number of them, and they're all called a little differently. They're given names by either the people who discovered the writings or the location of the writings or whatever. But there was something called Edwin Smith papyrus, and that was, I think it was discovered by this guy named Edwin Smith. They're ancient Egyptian writings that the Egyptians kind of started, were the first ones. I'm sure. Well, there was a lot of Chinese medicine going on too, but kind of at the same time. But these writings go back to 3000 BC, and they had to do specifically with medicine, science, math, all of those types of disciplines. But 3,500 years BC, we felt that the heart was much more than just a pumping mechanism. We felt like the heart played a central role in a system of channels that went throughout the body. So they had this concept of the heart having a central role in getting something around the body, and they identified that there were something that they referred to as channels. I would presume blood vessels. However, they thought that there was going through these vessels, these channels were air, blood, urine, body fluids, and even the soul.
And I'm guessing that it always took something traumatic for a discovery to be made. In other words, if you don't know about blood and you get a big cut, you're going to learn something about blood.
Right.
This has got to stop, or this person's not going to keep going anymore. Right.
Yes. I'm very much so. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of these lessons were learned based on personal experiences. Absolutely. So. Back in 1700 BC, again within one of the papyri, there was a quote describing the presence of pulses in the feet, hands, and head. Now, those are the three areas where we can feel pulses. You can feel pulses in your wrist. You can feel pulses in your neck. You can feel pulses in the ankles. And whoever was writing that at that time connected it somehow with the heart. But they didn't really, they really didn't get past that. And that comment in and of itself was a little deceiving with respect to the level of understanding that they had at that point, because otherwise their understanding was way off. So for instance, in the Ebers Papyrus, right around that same time, there is a quote that says, "There are 4 vessels to the nostrils, 2 of which convey mucus and 2 blood.
Okay.
There are 4 vessels to the liver, which convey to it moisture and air." So it's just it's interesting.
But people will tell you, you know about nosebleeds.
Yeah.
But what about eye bleeds, ear bleeds, and other bleeds? And the nose, now it makes sense. They must have decided, what's different about this nose thing? What's this nose all about?
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Mucus and blood would be the 2 things they would see coming from the nose. Yeah. So, and for a long time, it was felt that blood was carried through veins from the right side of the heart, but it was felt that air was the primary substance being carried through arteries in the left side of the heart. So, again, there was little bits and pieces of information that were sort of picked up in a very sporadic and infrequent sort of basis that kind of eventually brought it all together. But as time went on, unfortunately, our ability to understand the science of the body was clouded by mythology, our concept of the gods, and also philosophy. I mean, very early on, most of the medical / science type writings were done by people that we would refer to as philosophers.
Yeah, I was going to say thinkers. Yeah.
So, it wasn't, there was a very gray line between philosophy and science, medicine, math, all those other things. So from a philosophical standpoint, and this is kind of an interesting thing. At that time, we're talking, a couple thousand years ago, they felt that all living things had 4 elements to them: air, fire, water, and earth. Those are considered the 4 basic elements, and the quality of those elements were cold, moist, hot, and dry.
Pretty simple when you list it all out like that. But interesting. But equally as interesting to me is that when kids, they just keep saying why, and after a while, some of this must have been just because. Don't ask any more about that. Just because we don't know why yet. Yeah. But some of these things we're still figuring out.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. We actually that's a very poignant comment, because of the fact that we all along history, no matter what the discipline it is that you're talking about, we don't know the things that we don't know yet. And are there things that we're going to be learning about everything in the future? Yeah, I mean, look at and it's hyper hyperbolic. Look at the understanding that we've had with respect to medicine and science and all the rest. Just over the last 50 years, for instance. Look at how life has changed over the last 50 years. You can only imagine what's going to happen over the next 50 years. So anyway, there were these four qualities of the four elements. And then from that, they got to the point where they were referring to the four humors of the body, and the humors of the human body were blood, which is hot and moist; yellow bile, which is hot and dry; black bile, which is cold and dry; and phlegm, which is cold and moist. So we had blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm.
Boy, those are not my favorite cocktails, but
that's what the human body was boiled. So what did they mean by? We know what blood and phlegm is. What did they mean by yellow bile? Yeah. Well, yellow bile was something that was secreted by the liver, and if you had too much of it, it led to irascibility.
Irascibility.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, gee, I know a lot of people with too much yellow bile.
I know a lot of irascible people,
And then there's black bile. Black bile was secreted by kidneys and the spleen, and that led to melancholy.
It's so interesting the way they just decided that. Right?
It's very interesting. So, the concept of the humoral form of physiology dates back to 5th century BC, and the key to health was that all four of those humors were in equilibrium or in harmony.
In harmony,
so, disease, the presence of disease meant that,
something was not in harmony.
Yeah, exactly. One of those four humors were either, excessive or not enough, etc. Now, that led to, a number of different things. However, I guess one thing notable about the humoral concept of health in the human body is that at least they were trying to hone in on a real reason. Why do people get sick? They were trying to hone in on a real reason.
I also one of them was, why do people die?
That too. Too.
Some live forever, not really.
Well, or
you think?
Yeah, disease and death. So they were trying to, define and hone in on, specific reasons for that, and this was their first attempt. It's okay. Before that, it all had to do with evil spirits, and the gods didn't like you that day, or whatever. So it was all very, non-scientific. More, emotional and spiritual. So at least we were, at that point, we were moving in the direction of, having at least some form of science behind it all. Now, for the humoral, disease concept lasted for a long time. For instance, bloodletting. Mm-hmm.
That fascinated me.
One of those things that sort of addressed the humoral concept. For a long time, we thought that getting rid of some blood was going to be beneficial from a health standpoint. And that went on through the 1800s. For instance, George Washington. He died in 1799, and he came down with a sore throat and a cold or whatever. It's not exactly clear what happened, but he didn't get over it quickly, and he was being treated. Well, one of the things that he was being treated with, in addition to enemas, emetics, and blistering, was bloodletting.
Bloodletting. Now, the concept was, all right, you're sick, your blood, you need some new blood. So we're going to let some old blood out, and your body's going to make some new blood.
Well,
right?
probably that was the concept. Probably they had, the concept was that, there's something in the blood that's not good. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's true. I mean, if you have a very bad infection, it can be in your blood. But typically, most disease processes don't have to do with, specifically what's inside the blood. But yeah, I'm sure that was the concept. Let's get rid of the out with the bad, in with the new, and they were sort of getting rid of evil spirits or whatever that was in the blood, and assuming that your body was going to regenerate, which it would. But the report from George Washington's treatment is that they probably bloodlet up to 40% of his total blood volume. So it's almost half. Now he went on. That was when he died.
Yeah.
He went on to not survive that illness. So. Did the disease kill him or did the treatment kill him?
Yeah, I think loss of blood killed him.
Loss of blood probably
played
a role. And again, that was in 1799. That was not that long ago.
No,
but
a couple hundred years ago.
But
really.
bloodletting went on throughout probably most of the 1800s. We didn't really get rid of that concept of bloodletting until the 20th century. So that was, and that's all again based on the the humoral concept of illness and death in the human. So anyway, so we for many years we sort of went back and forth defining very small tidbits of health and in particular circulation. But the next person of note was a guy named Galen. And he lived in the 2nd century A.D. He was a very well-known, well-respected, physician and scientist at that time. He was probably the single most notable figure having to do with medicine, science, in the historical timeline since Hippocrates. Now, Hippocrates he lived he was born in 460 BC. So, Galen is now 500 years after Hippocrates. And he's kind of, he's accepted the mantle and he's kind of moving forward.
I wonder if that's why medicine said the Hippocratic Oath is what,
Oh, yeah. Hippocrates had, Hippocrates, it's interesting. He never really stumbled onto, many specifics having to do with the circulatory system. Now, the guy was brilliant, obviously, and, Hippocrates within the Venus, world is notable in that he was the first one to identify or understand that venous ulcers had to do with vein disease.
Wow.
And he was actually wrapping people's legs back then. So I mean that's an incredibly intuitive kind of discovery for him. And again, that was 460 BC. But Galen was around the time of Marcus Aurelius. He was the physician to Marcus Aurelius, who was a fairly notable Roman emperor, and he made some fairly good advancements with respect to the circulatory system. But again, things didn't really come together until William Harvey. Another figure of note is a guy named Vesalius, who was he was an anatomist. He did a lot of dissection. Now, prior to his time, there were religious and social kind of taboos against dissecting the human body. Most people couldn't do that. Vesalius in the middle 1500s was able to, and he made some fairly marked advances. But again, it was this guy William Harvey who lived in the late 1500s and up to the mid 1600s. An English guy who was able to finally come up with the concept of the circulation system originating from the heart and going in two different places in sequence, and was really able to get us to the point where we are able to define and understand the circulatory system as we do today.
Isn't it sort of interesting when you take a look at some of these anatomical drawings of those things?
Oh, yeah.
How accurate they are?
Yeah.
They withstood the test of time.
Oh yeah,
they were correct.
They were very Anatomy, understanding understanding anatomy happened much earlier than understanding all the minutia of physiology. And for instance, I was going to mention Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci lived in the mid 1400s, and Da Vinci did a lot of dissection of the human body and drawings, but he was coming at it, I think, from an artistic standpoint. He really wanted to understand the body so that he could draw it. But he did a tremendous number of drawings, subsequent to his dissections that were, as you mentioned, incredibly accurate.
Well, I want to tell you, gang, that somehow we're going to get this up on the website. And we took a huge departure from the normal show. Just another reminder that Vein Clinics of Hawaii on 4 islands are there for you. And Dr. Juliff, the medical director, this has been fascinating. I hope you've had some fun and learned some stuff that you can talk about around your coffee breaks. But remember, if you need to get some attention, you got to go to Vein Clinics of Hawaii. It's the best choice to make, and learn how all of these systems that we're talking about today, and all that blood gets rushing around, and you'll be better off for it. So please come back again next time. In the meantime, Vein Clinics of Hawaii. That's veinclinicsofhawaii.com. See you next time.
Well, that's our program for today, and we certainly hope you enjoyed meeting us. Please come back next week for our next episode. And in the meanwhile, to learn more, please visit our interactive website, veinclinicsofhawaii.com. That's veinclinicsofhawaii.com.